Sometimes death comes in the most unexpected ways, caused not by danger or disaster, but by a single bad decision. In this video, we'll look at 5 real stories of people who lost their lives in ways that were completely avoidable. These aren't just freak accidents. They're tragic reminders of how simple choices, made in the wrong moment, can turn suddenly and shockingly deadly.
Romania has Europe's largest brown bear populations living outside Russia. Their home is the vast Carpathian mountain range. Last week there was outrage when a 19-year-old trekker was mauled to death.
The Carpathian mountains, vast, rugged, and echoing with ancient silence, have always drawn wanderers seeking beauty and solitude. For 19-year-old Maria Diana, this wilderness was a dream. After months of grueling high school exams, she needed an escape, a reward, a breath of freedom. So in July 2024, she set out for the Yepi May Trail near Braov, eager to hike with her boyfriend and witness the famous Spumoasa waterfall. But the trail would offer no reward, only a nightmare that still haunts the country. Maria had always felt at home in the mountains, the cool air, the sweeping views, the rush of adventure. This was her element. Her boyfriend, ever the supportive companion, joined her on the hike, but not everyone shared her excitement. Her mother, pregnant and weighed down by a mother's instinct, pleaded with her to reconsider. "Please, Maria," she said. "These mountains are dangerous." Maria had smiled, brushing off the worry. Nothing bad will happen. But it did. The first stretch of the trail was peaceful. Towering trees swayed above them. The sound of birds and rushing water surrounded them like music. Maria and her boyfriend laughed, snapped photos, wandered hand in hand. But deep in the woods, something stirred, something watching. A low growl broke the peace like a thunderclap. From the underbrush emerged a massive brown bear. It stood tall, heavy with muscle, and locked its eyes on them. Maria froze. Her boyfriend stumbled backward, and then the bear charged. In a burst of panic, they scrambled for their phones. Maria's voice shook as she called emergency services. "It's coming! Please, we need help!" Her boyfriend called too, both of them desperate. But there was no time, no cavalry racing in, just the forest and death closing in. The bear struck first at Maria, slashing deep into her leg. Her scream cut through the trees. She fought, kicked, clawed, but the bear was relentless. It dragged her from the trail toward the cliffside. Her boyfriend, helpless, watched in horror as the animal mauled the girl he loved. And then came the final moment. With terrifying strength, the bear hurled Maria over the edge. She fell, minus 400 feet down a sheer cliff. The forest went silent. When the Salvamont Prahova rescue team arrived, it was too late. The bear was still there, prowling near Maria's body, blood staining its fur. The team was forced to make a decision. A single shot rang out, and the bear collapsed. But the nightmare wasn't over. At the base of the cliff, Maria's body lay broken, battered and torn, evidence of a merciless struggle. Her injuries were catastrophic. Deep bites, gaping claw wounds. No one could have survived it. News of Maria's death spread across Romania like wildfire. Her boyfriend, shattered, could barely speak. "I should have done more," he whispered. "It should have been me." Even veteran rescuers were shaken. Dan Banu, head of the rescue team, called it the worst bear attack he had witnessed in more than 10 years. Maria's death ignited a storm of debate across the country. Romania, home to one of Europe's largest brown bear populations outside Russia, had already seen rising bear encounters. Public fear turned into political action. Within days, the government approved a controversial measure, culling nearly 500 bears to prevent future tragedies. But that decision sparked outrage. Environmentalists warned that the real danger wasn't the bears, it was us. Human expansion, deforestation, and careless tourism had pushed wildlife closer to people. The mountains weren't changing. We were. And killing hundreds of bears, they said, was nothing more than a bandage on a wound we refused to examine. Maria Diana's story became more than a headline. It became a reckoning, a painful reminder that no matter how beautiful the wilderness may seem, it is never tame. It doesn't obey our plans or care for our comfort. She had come to the mountains in search of peace. She found something else. And as the wind moves through the trees of the Yepi May Trail, her final scream echoes, a voice lost to the wild, but never forgotten.
The intensity of the fire was clear from how little it left behind. When it began, the tent which had occupied this scorched space was packed with women and children celebrating a wedding. Fire officials say the temperature inside would have reached 1500 Celsius within just 2 minutes.
It was supposed to be a celebration, pure joy beneath a starlit sky, a wedding night in Oyun, Kuwait. Laughter echoed from within a sprawling white tent where women and children danced, clapped, and celebrated the union of two hearts. The scent of perfume and roasted lamb filled the air. Music played, smiles beamed, but within moments, those smiles turned to screams. On the evening of August 15, 2009, the joy inside that wedding tent was shattered by flames that came from nowhere and consumed everything in their path. The fire tore through the tent with terrifying speed. It had only one exit, no safety precautions, no chance for escape. Within just 3 minutes, the structure was engulfed. People trapped inside clawed at the fabric walls. Mothers screamed for their children. Guests rushed to help, only to be forced back by the unbearable heat. The temperature inside reportedly reached over 500 degrees Celsius. The smoke was thick. The fire was absolute. When it was over, all that remained was twisted metal and ash, and the charred bodies of dozens who never made it out. 57 people lost their lives that night. Nearly 90 others were injured. Many of the dead were so badly burned that they could only be identified through DNA or dental records. It was the deadliest civilian tragedy Kuwait had seen in 4 decades. But this wasn't an accident. This was murder. The next day, investigators revealed a horrifying truth. The fire had been deliberately set. A 23-year-old woman named Nasra Youssef Mohammed Al-Anezi had walked up to the tent and poured gasoline at its entrance before lighting it on fire. She stood back and watched the inferno consume the people inside. Nasra was no stranger to the groom. She was his first wife. In Kuwait, polygamy is legal, and that night, her husband was marrying a second wife. But Nasra didn't just feel betrayed. She burned with rage. She waited until the women and children had gathered separately in their part of the tent, and then she struck. She was arrested the very next day. At first, she confessed, but as her trial began in October 2009, she changed her story. She claimed the confession had been forced, that she'd been threatened in prison. She said she had suffered mental disorders since childhood. Then she claimed she hadn't used gasoline at all, only cursed water as part of a black magic ritual. She insisted it hadn't been arson, not murder, not revenge, just misunderstood superstition. The court didn't buy it. Her own husband testified against her. So did the maid who'd witnessed her rage. After months of proceedings and psychiatric evaluations, Nasra was found guilty in March 2010 on 57 counts of premeditated murder and starting a fire with intent to kill. She was sentenced to death. 7 years passed. And on January 25, 2017, Nasra Youssef Mohammed Al-Anezi was hanged at Central Prison in Kuwait. Hers was one of 7 executions carried out that day. But for the families of the victims, it did little to erase the agony she left behind. That night in Oyun still burns in memory, a night that was meant to mark the beginning of a beautiful new chapter for one couple, but ended in smoke, screams, and staggering loss. A celebration twisted into an act of vengeance so cruel, so absolute, that even time cannot soften its horror. A wedding is supposed to bring people together. This one tore families apart forever.
Good evening. A young man has fallen to his death in a tragic accident at a sinkhole in Mount Gambier. Police say Bradley Streeter was with friends when he fell from a platform above the popular tourist attraction.
It was just past midnight on February 8, 2020, in Mount Gambier, South Australia. The night was calm, the air warm with the quiet hum of a town not yet asleep. At the heart of the city sat the Cave Garden Sinkhole, a place of ancient beauty where nature meets shadow. Tourists and locals alike are drawn to its mysterious depths, to the light shows that dance across its walls, to the vines that cling to the sheer rock face, whispering stories older than memory. That night, 20-year-old Bradley Streeter stood at the edge of it all. Bradley wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was energy in motion, loud, funny, full of spark, a Luan native who loved the outdoors, off-roading and pulling apart engines like puzzles waiting to be solved. He had already torn through 10 motorbikes and had big plans to become a mechanic. To his mother, Marianne, he wasn't just a son. He was her heart, her mind, her soul. His presence lit up any room, and even those who met him once seemed to remember him. But something shifted that night. One moment of impulse, one rush of adrenaline. Bradley and his friends had made their way to the lower viewing platform at the sinkhole, minus 98 feet above the stone floor below. The spot had seen countless visitors. Thousands had stood there safely, watching the world disappear beneath them. But that barrier, meant to protect, wasn't enough to stop curiosity or risk. At some point, Bradley climbed onto the rail. It was narrow, slick with night moisture, and nearly 100 feet off the ground. But Bradley was adventurous, fearless, maybe too fearless. In front of his friends, he attempted a handstand, upside down, balanced only by instinct and youth. Then he slipped. The fall was instant, silent, terrifying. His friends screamed. Emergency services were called immediately. Inspector Campbell Hill was one of the first to be notified. A fall into the cave garden, a vertical drop. He knew what that meant. It would take the rope rescue unit. Fire crews, police, and the state emergency service rushed to the scene. They worked in the dark, rappelling down jagged volcanic rock to recover a young man who only moments before had been laughing with friends. By 3 a.m. it was over. Bradley had been pronounced dead. Station Officer Rob Baker later spoke of the recovery. It wasn't easy. It never is. But it matters. Bringing someone home matters. Emotional support was provided to the team, because even professionals can break when the weight of a life lost is too heavy to carry. No foul play, no violence, just a split-second choice on a steel rail high above stone. A decision that from the ground might have seemed harmless, but at that height, it was unforgiving. News spread fast. Friends flooded social media with tributes. "I'll love you forever. You were the best mate." Too many memories to count, and one that hit like a punch to the chest. Fly high with your dad, because this wasn't Bradley's family's first heartbreak. His father had died just 2 years earlier. Now Marianne had lost them both. The community rallied. A fundraiser helped cover the funeral expenses. The mayor expressed sorrow and said the city might reassess the site's safety, though the platform had always met standards. But as Inspector Hill later said, there was no way to plan for this kind of moment. No railing tall enough to stop a decision made in a heartbeat. Today the cave garden remains what it has always been. Quiet, majestic, cloaked in shadows and light. Tourists still visit. Locals still walk the paths. But for those who knew Bradley Streer, it is no longer just a scenic landmark.
The Department of Wildlife Resources confirms that 58-year-old Lester Harvey Jr. of Phoenix, Virginia, has died from his injuries after being hit by a bear falling from a tree on Monday morning.
It was December 9th, 2024 in the quiet woods of Lunenburg County, Virginia. For Lester C. Harvey Jr., 58 years old and a father of 5, it was meant to be just another day doing what he'd done his entire life, hunting. Lester was born for this. Raised in rural Virginia, he learned the rhythms of the forest before he could drive a car. Hunting wasn't just a sport to him, it was legacy. That morning, he joined family and close friends in the woods near Charles Hall Road, tracking a black bear. They had done this countless times before. Moving together through the dense trees, they spotted the bear. It had climbed up a tree, seeking escape. It wasn't uncommon. The group held their ground, watching from a distance as someone took aim. A single shot rang out, slicing through the still winter air. The bear was hit, and then came the moment that no one could have predicted. With no warning, the massive creature, several hundred pounds of muscle and instinct, tumbled from the tree, a black blur falling through bare branches. It landed directly on Lester, just 10 feet away from where he'd been standing. There was no time to react. No chance to move. The weight crushed him instantly, slamming him to the cold, hard ground. Panic erupted. His friends and family rushed to his side, trying desperately to move the bear off of him, shouting his name, calling for help. Paramedics arrived and rushed him to the hospital, where he held on for 4 long days, fighting through unimaginable pain. But on December 13th, Lester Harvey was gone. The Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources investigated and confirmed the truth. A freak accident. A shot fired and a bear fell. His death stunned the community. His son Josh wrote with heartbreak and pride, "Dad was doing what he loved most, hunting with me and some of his best friends when this happened. I love you, Dad. We made so many great memories together, and I'm grateful for everything you taught me." His daughter Lindsay's grief cut deeper. "I'm broken in ways I didn't know I could be. Please keep us in your prayers." Lester left behind his wife April, their 3 sons, 2 daughters, and 8 grandchildren, a family that had built their lives around his steady presence. Every Sunday meal, every story by the fireplace, every hunting trip, they all revolved around him, and suddenly that center was gone. At Mount Carmel United Methodist Church, people packed the pews, family, friends, neighbors, even folks who only knew him through his quiet acts of kindness. Tears were shed, stories were told. Some couldn't believe it. A bear falling from a tree? It sounded unreal. But it wasn't a myth, it was real, and it hurt like hell. Lester's death made headlines across the country. But for those who knew him, the news never captured the full picture. The way his laugh could fill a room, the way his eyes lit up around his grandkids, the way he always knew how to fix things, not just with tools, but with wisdom, with love, with time. In the end, the family chose to honor not the tragedy, but the man, the memories, the love. They said goodbye with stories of fishing trips, backyard cookouts, and long drives through backcountry roads. He may have died in a shocking way, but he lived with purpose, with heart, and he left a legacy no accident could erase. It was May 21st, 2004 in Lake Jackson, Texas, a quiet town where life rarely made headlines. But that morning, everything changed. Inside his home, 58-year-old Michael Warner, a seemingly reserved machine shop owner, was found dead. To neighbors, he was quiet and hardworking, but behind that silence was a hidden struggle, one that ended in one of the most bizarre deaths the town had ever seen. Michael had battled alcohol addiction for years, but due to ulcers and severe acid reflux, drinking was excruciating. Doctors warned him it could be deadly. Still, the addiction didn't let go. So he found another way, one few would ever imagine. Instead of drinking, Michael began administering alcohol rectally. It bypassed the liver's filtering system, entering his bloodstream quickly and powerfully. From childhood, he was familiar with enemas. His mother used them regularly on him. As an adult, he experimented. Coffee, soap, and eventually, alcohol. On the night of May 20th, Michael used 2 1.5-liter bottles of cherry sherry, over 100 fluid ounces, through an enema. He passed out during the night, but the alcohol kept entering his system. By morning, he was dead. Toxicology tests showed his blood alcohol content was 0.47%, nearly 6 times the legal driving limit. Detective Lieutenant Robert Turner called it a level that typically ends in the hospital or the morgue. But the tragedy didn't stop with Michael's death. His wife, Tammy Jean Warner, was arrested and charged with criminally negligent homicide. Investigators believed she had helped administer the fatal enema, knowing how dangerous it was. Tammy insisted otherwise. She said Michael always handled the process himself, that he was in full control. She denied having any role, and also denied destroying his will, another allegation that deepened suspicions. Released on $30,000 bond, Tammy faced trial in July. The case sparked national attention, not just for its shocking nature, but for the disturbing questions it raised. Was this a tragic accident, or something darker? Medical experts weighed in. Rectal alcohol use, they said, is dangerously real. There's no gag reflex, no nausea, just pure unchecked absorption. A single mistake can be fatal. 3 years later, Michael was posthumously awarded a Darwin Award, a satirical recognition for fatal lapses in judgment. Online, some laughed, others were horrified. But beneath the ridicule was a man battling addiction in silence. Michael Warner wasn't just a headline or a punchline. He was a person coping with pain in the only way he thought he could. Whether Tammy played a role remains debated, but one truth stands. This was more than a bizarre death. It was a deeply human tragedy born of secrecy, desperation, and a decision that cost everything. On September 27, 2023, the Al-Haytham Wedding Hall on the edge of Qaraqosh in Iraq's northern Nineveh province was filled with celebration. It began as the bride and groom stepped onto the dance floor for their slow dance. Guests cheered, cameras flashed, fireworks erupted from the floor, an indoor display meant to dazzle. Instead, it brought chaos. Sparks shot up, striking the ornate ceiling. Within seconds, the chandelier ignited. Then came the flames. At first, disbelief, then panic. Burning debris rained down as the plastic ceiling, made from cheap, highly flammable panels, went up in flames. Thick smoke filled the air. Screams replaced the music. Rania Wad, 17, said, "The fireworks started to climb to the ceiling. The whole hall went up in flames." Her hand was burned, but she survived. Others weren't so lucky. The bride and groom made it out, but not unscathed. Both suffered burns. The bride lost her entire family, 3 brothers, uncles, young cousins. The groom lost his mother. One survivor said, "I have a friend whose whole family died. His children, his wife, everyone. It's a human catastrophe." Witnesses recalled the fire beginning between 10 o'clock and 10:45 p.m. "One of the fireworks hit the roof," a man said. "Everything caught fire and started falling on people's heads." Then darkness. In the chaos, the owner cut electricity, thinking a short circuit had started the blaze, but that plunged the entire hall into blackness. No lights, no exits, only smoke and fire. The hall, built to hold 500, was packed with nearly twice that. There were no emergency exits. Some made it out, but many did not. The roof collapsed as flames consumed the venue. By the time firefighters arrived, it was too late. An AFP photographer captured ambulances racing in, while people gathered outside hospitals to donate blood. The official death toll ranged from 107 to 114. Over 150 were injured, many with severe burns. Children were among the dead. Survivors arrived wrapped in gauze in shock. Investigators later confirmed the hall was covered in highly flammable sandwich panels. One fire expert said, "These fires are completely avoidable, but no one ever thinks about it until it's too late." The Iraqi interior minister called it 100% accidental, caused by fireworks. But the lack of safety protocols, emergency exits, and use of dangerous materials made it far worse. 14 people were arrested, including the hall owner and those who lit the fireworks. Several local officials were fired. The Prime Minister called for the harshest punishments. 3 days of national mourning followed. Qaraqosh, once Iraq's largest Christian town, had only recently begun to rebuild after ISIS overran it in 2014. Now it was burying entire families. Outside the morgue, mothers wept. Grandparents clutched photos. "I'm waiting for the bodies of my daughter and 3 grandchildren," said Mariam Kedr. One man managed to save his grandson, but lost his wife in the chaos. And through it all, the bride and groom stood among the ruins, their faces burned, their spirits shattered. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a human failure, born of negligence, greed, and broken systems. For over 100 guests, it was their final night. It was the evening of December 27th, 2024, in Marianui, a quiet suburb in Napier, New Zealand. Rifa Carter was just 33 years old. A father of 3, humble, the kind of man who'd dive for seafood just to share it with others. He played rugby for the Eskview Rugby Football Club, fast on the field and full of laughter off it. To his partner Holly Tanau, he was more than a father to their 3 kids, Amaya, Mitara, and Ayotarangi. He was her best friend, her rock. That night, Rifa came across a mattress. No one knows exactly where it came from. Maybe he found it. Maybe someone offered it. What's clear is that he wanted to take it home. It was just over a kilometer away. A short ride, a simple plan, but there were no straps, no ropes, no safe way to secure it. So Rifa did what many wouldn't even consider. He lay on top of the mattress, on the roof of a black station wagon, using his own body to weigh it down. Behind the wheel was his cousin, 23-year-old Trinity Brown. She had been drinking earlier that evening, and yet, when he asked, she agreed to drive. The car started down Kennedy Road. It was late, just after 9 p.m. The roads weren't crowded. They didn't have far to go, but as they picked up speed, the wind pushed against the mattress. Rifa held on. There were no seat belts, no second chances. Onlookers saw the surreal sight, a man lying on top of a moving car, and before they could fully process it, disaster struck. The call came in. A man had fallen onto the pavement on Newfield Avenue. Emergency services arrived quickly, but it was too late. Rifa was already gone. His injuries were catastrophic. Police confirmed that no other vehicles were involved. Just one fall, one brutal impact, one irreversible moment. 2 days later, his name was released to the public, Rifa Carter, and suddenly the headlines weren't about a bizarre accident. They were about a man whose absence left a hole in a family, in a team, in an entire community. Tributes poured in. Holly posted through tears, remembering the love of her life, the father of her children. His sister Robin spoke of his patience, his kindness. His rugby club shared memories of a teammate whose laughter had once filled locker rooms. Then came the arrest. On December 30th, Trinity Brown was taken into custody. Police charged her with reckless driving causing death and with driving over the legal alcohol limit. A cousin, a friend, now burdened with the weight of taking a life she never meant to. In court, 2 months later, Trinity admitted everything. Judge Russell Collins didn't need to be told how much it hurt. He saw it in her eyes. He saw it in the silence of the courtroom. He called it what it was, a tragedy that didn't need to happen. Instead of prison, the judge sentenced her to 12 months of home detention, 2 years off the road, mandatory counseling, no alcohol, no drugs, and a clear message. The only way to honor Rifa's life now was to live hers with meaning, to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. Rifa's death wasn't the result of cruelty. It wasn't violence. It was one bad decision, a reckless, spontaneous act that lasted only minutes, but left scars that may never fade. In Maranui, his memory lingers in the rugby field cheers, in the laughter of his children, in the quiet heartbreak of a partner who still waits for the sound of his voice. A Give a Little page was set up for his family. Strangers and friends alike gave what they could, hoping to ease a pain that money could never touch. police closed the case with a haunting conclusion. No foul play, no outside interference, just one risky choice that changed everything in seconds.
A father died protecting his children in a rare polar bear attack in Canada's northernmost territory of Nunavut.
On July 3, 2018, what was meant to be a peaceful, sacred family outing in the Canadian Arctic became a scene of unimaginable horror. That morning, 31-year-old Aaron Gibbons left Arviat, Nunavut with his young daughters, heading toward Sentry Island. Aaron wasn't a tourist. He was born of the North, carved by its cruelty and its beauty. Though he worked in a nearby gold mine, his spirit belonged to the land, the hunt, the quiet harmony between human and wilderness. That day, he wanted to show his daughters how to gather Arctic tern eggs, how to respect the balance of nature. As the day wore on, a creeping unease began to stir. Then, Aaron saw it, a pale shape moving through the landscape, a polar bear. At first, it was distant, a ghost against the white and gray, but then it moved with purpose, slow at first, then faster, straight toward them. There was no time to think, no time to react in fear, only instinct. Aaron shouted to his daughters, "Run to the boat!" His voice hard, sharp, commanding. They listened. They didn't look back. They ran, but Aaron didn't follow. He turned, planted his feet, faced the charging predator. No weapon in hand, no protection, only the overwhelming need to protect his children. He stood between them and a killing machine that could tear a man apart in seconds, and he didn't flinch. The bear hit him. His daughters, trembling in the boat just yards away, could only scream and cry as they watched their father be mauled before their eyes. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Aaron Gibbons was gone. His body lay broken and bloodied, but not in vain. His final act had been one of pure courage. The bear was shot and killed, but the real damage couldn't be undone. In Arviat, the grief was raw, and the anger ran deep. This wasn't just a rare tragedy. It was part of a pattern, one growing more dangerous every year. Some pointed to climate change, saying melting sea ice had driven bears inland in search of food. Others looked to Churchill, Manitoba, the polar bear capital of the world, where guided tours allowed people to get dangerously close to these wild predators. Aaron's uncle, Gordy Kidpick, a respected elder in the community, didn't stay silent. He spoke out about the risks his people were facing, warning that unless something changed, Aaron would not be the last. But amidst the questions, one truth echoed louder than all the rest. Aaron Gibbons was a hero. He was posthumously awarded Canada's Star of Courage, one of the nation's highest honors for bravery. But no medal could ever capture what he gave that day. No ceremony could ever fill the silence he left behind. What he left was more than a tragic headline. He left a story that shook the North to its core, a story of a father's sacrifice, of instincts stronger than fear, of love that chose death so that others might live. It was a day meant for celebration, a day of union and joy. 19-year-old Safina Latif was on her way to start a new life, dressed in the colors of tradition and hope. The sun was dipping behind the towering mountains of Azad Kashmir, casting golden light across the winding road that connected Neelam Valley to Muzaffarabad. The Toyota Corolla carrying her and her loved ones hugged the narrow bends of the Muzaffarabad-Neelam Valley Road, unaware that this ride would end not at a wedding venue but in tragedy. The car, packed with 9 passengers, including children, was descending the steep slopes near Nosiri village when it approached a sharp curve near Chakranka. The road here is infamous, tight, crumbling at the edges with no guardrails, and in an instant that would steal 4 lives, the vehicle lost control. Eyewitnesses would later describe how the car swerved, wobbled, then vanished from view, plunging into a deep ravine, hundreds of feet below. The silence that followed was pierced only by the screams of the injured and the rising panic of villagers rushing to the scene. When rescue teams arrived, the wreckage was barely recognizable. The twisted frame of the car lay crushed against the rocks. 4 passengers were already gone. Among them, the radiant bride, Safina, the driver, Nadim, son of Dulat Khan, Amina, wife of Muhammad Salim, and Shagufta, wife of Ayaz. Their journey had ended before it truly began. Inside the shattered vehicle were 5 others, miraculously clinging to life. The groom, 22-year-old Owais, was found dazed and bloodied. His wedding clothes were torn, his hands trembling as he cradled one of the children. The others were tiny, injured, crying. The youngest, just 6 months old. Aimal, age 2, Aima, 5, Insha, 6 months, and Noor, another 5-year-old. All rushed to the central hospital in Muzaffarabad, battered and traumatized. It was supposed to be the happiest day in Safina's life. Instead, her name joined the growing list of souls lost to the deadly roads of Azad Kashmir. These tragic crashes happen far too often. Sharp turns, unguarded ravines, worn-out tires, and infrastructure unfit for the lives it's meant to carry. The roads claim lives with cold regularity, and yet little changes. There were no explosions, no sirens, just a quiet, preventable catastrophe. The kind that unfolds in seconds but leaves scars for a lifetime. On that mountain road, hope fell into the abyss. A bride died before she could say, "I do." A groom survived, but his heart, like the wrecked vehicle, may never be whole again. It was a cold November day in 2009 when a peaceful afternoon at Burn Bear Park in Switzerland turned into a waking nightmare. Families strolled along the park paths. Children pointed with delight at the majestic European brown bears below, unaware that within moments they would witness something few could ever forget. At the heart of the park, Finn, a 4-year-old 40-stone bear, paced within his enclosure. Towering, powerful, and revered, he was a living symbol of Bern's heritage. But then, something strange caught his eye. A man, perched high above the pit, not an official, not staff, just a visitor, staring down from the 20-foot ledge, unmoving, and then, without a word, without hesitation, he jumped. Gasps and screams erupted from the crowd. Some thought it was a stunt. Others froze, unsure if they were witnessing reality or a terrible mistake. But there was no time to process, no time to understand. The man had landed inside the bear's world, and Finn reacted. In an instant, centuries of instinct came to life. The bear lunged. Within seconds, he had the man in his jaws, lifting him like a rag doll, dragging him across the enclosure with terrifying ease. His teeth, strong enough to crush bone, clamped down. His claws, made for tearing, raked across flesh. The man screamed. Blood soaked into the dirt. The bear didn't stop. Visitors panicked. Some yelled for help. Others shouted, "Throw stones!" But no one could get close. No one could stop what was happening. Police officers had already been called when the man first appeared on the ledge. They arrived just seconds before the jump, but it was already too late. The bear had him. There was no time for negotiation, no time to reason with the wild. Armed with 9mm fragmentation rounds, officers first fired warning shots, hoping, praying that the noise would startle the animal. It didn't. Finn held on, his massive frame looming over the bloodied man. Then came the decision no one wanted to make. A single shot, straight to the chest. Finn recoiled, wounded, and finally backed away. The enclosure fell silent. Then a flurry of movement, zookeepers, police, paramedics all rushing into the enclosure. The man, battered and unconscious, was loaded onto a stretcher. His head and legs were mangled. Deep bites, torn flesh, a blood trail that told the story better than words ever could. And yet, he lived. Back at the hospital, his condition was described as comfortable. No name was released. Some said he was mentally ill, confused. But whatever his reasons, he had climbed into the wrong place at the worst time. And Finn, the bear, the attacker, the victim, was left fighting for his life too. The bullet had lodged in his chest. Vets worked fast, choosing not to remove the splinters, fearing it might do more harm than good. Antibiotics were administered, and slowly he began to recover. But the attack left more than scars. It shook the city. It broke hearts, not for the man, but for the bear. The people of Bern didn't blame Finn. He had done what wild animals do. He had reacted, survived, protected his space. Flowers appeared outside his enclosure, pots of honey. Messages written in shaky handwriting. "Forgive us," one note read. Even witnesses who saw the horror unfold couldn't escape the weight of it. One visitor, Sam Brooks from the UK, said, "I can still see it when I close my eyes." The bear was standing over him, throwing him back and forth. It was chaos. People were screaming. Footage from the attack showed the terrifying reality. Finn pouncing, jaws clamped around the man's shoulder, the victim bleeding as onlookers cried for help. But in the end, the most heartbreaking part wasn't the blood. It wasn't the screams. It was the understanding that neither man nor bear had truly won.
Not me. Hi.
For 13 summers, Timothy Treadwell lived on the edge of civilization, deep in the wild heart of Alaska, where grizzly bears roam and the rules of man no longer apply. He camped alone among the bears, gave them names, spoke to them like old friends. It was October 2003. The bears were shifting into survival mode, leaner now, hungrier, more dangerous. Most had vanished into hibernation, but not all. The ones that remained were restless, desperate and unpredictable. By his side was Amy Huguenard, a physician assistant who had joined him in Alaska despite her growing fear. She had wanted to go home, but love, sometimes, keeps people in places they should have left. They had planned to return to California, flights booked, but at the last minute, a small dispute with an airline ticket agent set off Treadwell's temper. Rather than leave, he made a fateful decision: go back into the park. He wanted to stay one more week, one last search for a female bear he hadn't seen yet. He thought he was safe. They set up camp near a salmon stream, a feeding ground. But that year, the salmon were few, and the bears that haunted the edges of the river weren't the familiar ones. On one of his final recordings, Treadwell caught a bear on camera, big, gaunt, and agitated, digging through the shallows for scraps. On October 5th, he made a routine satellite phone call to a friend in Malibu. No sign of panic, just idle conversation. It was the last time anyone would hear from him alive. The next day, a bush pilot arrived at the camp for pickup. What he found was unsettling. The campsite had been destroyed, tents crushed, gear scattered. A massive grizzly lingered nearby. When rangers arrived, what they uncovered was horrific. Not far from the camp were the remains of Timothy Treadwell, his severed head, a section of spine, and an arm, still wearing a wristwatch. Amy's body was partially buried under a mound of twigs and earth, food storage by bear instinct. The grizzly guarding the site was shot and killed. A second, younger bear that later charged at the rangers was also put down. Inside the stomach of the first bear, human remains, fingers, limbs, flesh from both Treadwell and Amy. But perhaps the most chilling discovery wasn't the bodies. It was the video camera they found in the debris. It hadn't captured the attack visually, but the audio was intact. 6 agonizing minutes of terror, screams, roars, pleading, death. The recording begins with Treadwell shouting, "I'm being killed out here!" You can hear Amy's voice, panicked, desperate, telling him to play dead. There's a pause, a silence, a retreat. Then the bear comes back. The screams return, louder, until finally there's only silence. The camera had been recording the whole time. It had all happened so fast, there wasn't even time to remove the lens cap. Filmmaker Werner Herzog, who would later create Grizzly Man based on Treadwell's life, listened to the audio once. He refused to include it in his documentary. He called it too horrific, too personal, a moment no one should be forced to hear. Treadwell's story divided people. Some saw him as a misguided idealist, others called him a reckless fool. Park officials had warned him again and again, don't get too close, don't interfere, don't treat the wild like a sanctuary. He broke every rule, camped illegally, ignored bear safety protocols, believed he was special, that the bears loved him back. But they didn't. Wildlife ecologist Tom Smith said it best, "It's tragic, but it's not unpredictable." In the end, Treadwell became what he had always feared for the bears, a casualty of misunderstanding. It was the night of August 26th, 2012, in Kalispell, Montana. That Sunday evening, 44-year-old Randy Lee Tenley, known to his friends simply as Tater, made a decision so strange and so unthinkable. Randy loved the outdoors. Born in West Virginia, he had lived most of his life in Montana and was deeply rooted in the community. He had a son, a large extended family, and plenty of friends. But he also had a mischievous streak, a love for practical jokes and bizarre ideas. And on this night, that love would cost him everything. As the sky darkened over Highway 93, just south of Rocky Cliff Road, Randy stepped out of the trees wearing a full-body ghillie suit, a camouflage outfit used by military snipers to disappear into nature. His goal? To fake a Bigfoot sighting? Not for fame, not for money, just for laughs. He wanted someone driving by to catch a glimpse of him, panic, and later report a sighting of the legendary creature. But Randy never considered how invisible the suit would make him on a rural highway at night. At around 10:30 p.m., a 15-year-old girl from the nearby town of Summers was driving along that stretch of road. She didn't even see him. 1 second, her headlights swept across the pavement, and the next, they hit something. Someone. She had struck Randy, knocking him to the ground. Stunned and in shock, she barely had time to react before another vehicle came barreling down the same lane. A 17-year-old girl, also from Summers, ran over Randy as he lay motionless on the asphalt. By the time emergency services arrived, Randy was dead. His injuries were catastrophic. There was nothing anyone could do. One of the teenage passengers suffered minor injuries, but the real trauma was psychological. 2 young drivers, still kids, had just been part of a fatal accident they never could have avoided. Police launched an investigation, trying to make sense of the chaos. Montana Highway Patrol Trooper Jim Schneider spoke to Randy's friends, who admitted what he was trying to do. It was a Bigfoot prank. Nothing malicious, just a stunt. But the trooper was baffled. "You can't make it up," he said. "I haven't seen or heard of anything like this before." No one had. That night, there were no 911 calls about a mysterious creature lurking near the road. The only calls were from the crash site. The reality was far stranger. Authorities suspected alcohol might have played a role, but toxicology results were pending. News of the bizarre incident spread fast. It wasn't long before national outlets were reporting on the strange story of a man dressed as Bigfoot who died during his own hoax. But behind the headlines was a deeper sadness. A man who'd lived a full life, who had a family, friends, and a history in the town, reduced to a punchline because of one bad decision. Randy was born on December 10, 1967, and graduated from Flathead High School in 1985. He worked at Plum Creek for over a decade and later at a local moving company. He left behind a son, Hunter, as well as his mother, stepfather, siblings, and countless others who cared for him. His father had passed away years earlier. A private burial and public memorial were held on September 1st at Flathead Christian Center, where friends and family gathered to remember him. It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives, a fairy tale wedding in the peaceful village of Goult in southeastern France. But by dawn, that dream had turned into a blood-soaked nightmare that would haunt the village forever. As the celebration slowly wound down in the early hours of Sunday, June 22nd, 2025, music still played faintly from the venue. The bride, a 27-year-old woman radiant in her wedding gown, stepped out with her new husband, a 25-year-old man she had just vowed to spend her life with. Their arms were linked, their smiles still fresh. They were surrounded by family. Among them, the groom's sister and a 13-year-old boy, believed to be the bride's son from a previous relationship. But just as they were leaving, minutes, maybe seconds before the night would have ended peacefully, hell broke loose. A car sped up the quiet village road and screeched to a halt. Out poured several masked figures, cold, armed, and precise. They didn't issue a warning. There was no hesitation. They opened fire instantly, spraying bullets into the crowd of departing guests. Chaos exploded. The stillness of the village was shattered by the crack of gunshots and the screams of the wounded. The bride was hit multiple times, her body collapsing in front of the car. Her wedding dress, once a symbol of joy, became soaked in blood. Her husband was struck in the chest, bleeding heavily. The boy in the car was also shot, suffering critical injuries. The groom's sister was hit too, caught in the madness. In a last, desperate act of survival, the wounded groom managed to climb behind the wheel of the car. As he tried to flee the scene with his injured loved ones, he slammed the vehicle into one of the gunmen. The masked attacker was crushed and killed, his body left mangled in the street beside the bride's. By the time police arrived, the gunman had vanished into the night, leaving behind a trail of death and horror. The bride and the attacker were both declared dead at the scene. The groom, his sister, and the 13-year-old boy were rushed to nearby hospitals in critical condition. Shock rippled through the quiet community. Residents looked on in disbelief. Locals who had attended the wedding struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed, what had just stolen away a young woman's life before her marriage had even truly begun. French authorities immediately launched a full-scale investigation. Prosecutors in nearby Avignon opened a case for murder and attempted murder by an organized gang. Sources close to the investigation told French newspaper Le Figaro that the attack was likely not random. It bore the unmistakable signature of a targeted hit, possibly gang-related, possibly drug-related. Evidence suggested it was a planned ambush, possibly linked to the criminal records of some of the victims. Rumors quickly spread. According to reports, both the groom and his sister had past convictions, including violent offenses. The bride, however, had no known criminal history. She was reportedly an innocent caught in the storm, a young woman with a child, now dead just hours after saying, "I do." The Moroccan community in the region, to which the couple reportedly belonged, has been left reeling. Officials have not confirmed the victims' names, citing the ongoing investigation and concerns over retaliation. But whispers in the streets point to long-standing tensions in the area, unresolved conflicts, grudges, and perhaps a dangerous past catching up to someone on a day when they least expected it. For now, the identity of the gunmen remains unknown. Police believe several attackers are still at large and are working tirelessly to piece together what happened in those final moments. A village that rarely makes the news is now at the center of an international tragedy, one that has raised troubling questions about safety, organized crime, and how even a wedding can become a battlefield. It was the early morning of February 15th, 2014, in Little Rock, Arkansas. Inside a white Hyundai Sonata, 7 teenagers were wide awake, laughing, whispering, hearts pounding with excitement. Among them was 15-year-old Adrienne Broadway, a high school student with a radiant smile and a love for goofing off with friends. That night, it was just another round in an ongoing prank war. Nothing serious, nothing dangerous. At least that's what they believed. Months earlier, on Halloween, a boy Adrienne and her friends knew had pranked them. Now it was their turn. They came prepared. Eggs, mayonnaise, leaves, toilet paper. It was silly. It was petty. It was teenage life. Around 1 a.m., they rolled up to the boy's house, more specifically, the home of his father, Willie Noble. They giggled as they smeared the mess over a car parked in the driveway. They had no idea it belonged to Willie, no idea what kind of man he was, and certainly no idea what he would do next, because instead of laughing it off, instead of calling the police, instead of talking to his son, Willie Noble went inside, got his gun, and waited. Roughly 45 minutes later, the teens drove by the house again. Not to prank, not to start anything. Just driving by, maybe curious, maybe careless, maybe just circling back on the joke. Whatever the reason, they didn't even stop. But this time, Willie Noble was waiting. Without a word, he stepped out of his house, raised his handgun, and opened fire. Bullets ripped through the cold night air. The window of the Sonata shattered as glass exploded inward. Screams, chaos. One bullet struck the driver, 18-year-old Deason Nelson, in the hand. But the worst hit Adrienne Broadway in the head. Nelson, bleeding and panicked, somehow managed to keep control of the car. He drove them to the first place he could think of, a gas station, a harsh, fluorescent oasis in the dark. There, with his friends covered in blood and confusion, they called 911. Paramedics rushed Adrienne to Arkansas Children's Hospital, but the damage was already done. She never woke up. The news shattered Little Rock. Adrienne wasn't a troublemaker. She wasn't a criminal. She was 15, smart, funny, always laughing. Her friends said she lit up every room. That night, a candlelight vigil was held. Faces lit by soft flickers, eyes red, hearts broken. Princess Pearson, one of Adrienne's closest friends, said she was always smiling, always laughing. We were always just playing around, being goofy. Another friend, Legia Bland, spoke through tears. They were trying to be teenagers. Teenagers make mistakes. This was one of those mistakes. But mistakes aren't supposed to cost lives. And pranks aren't supposed to be answered with bullets. Social media erupted. Shock, anger, grief, not just from those who knew her, but from people across the state, across the country. Adrienne's name was everywhere, not because she asked for it, but because she was gone. Willie Noble was arrested that same day. He claimed he didn't mean to hurt anyone, that he only wanted to scare the teens. But the bullet holes in the car told a different story. He had aimed, he had fired, and Adrienne had died. The charges were severe. One count tied directly to Adrienne's death, others for endangering the teens and using a firearm. His bond, $1 million. He sat in jail while a city mourned. In court, his defense argued fear. They pointed to Arkansas's stand-your-ground laws claiming Noble had a right to protect his property, but the teens were driving away. The prank was over, the danger was gone, yet the bullets came anyway. The jury didn't waver. They found him guilty on all counts, 30 years in prison. That was the price for turning a childish prank into a fatal act. Noble appealed. His lawyers tried to poke holes in the charges, arguing legal technicalities. But in April 2017, the Arkansas Supreme Court upheld the conviction. Only one justice dissented, saying the law may have been misapplied. But for Adrienne's family, there was no loophole to undo the truth. Adrienne wasn't planning a crime. She wasn't armed. She wasn't a threat. She was a teenager out with friends doing something dumb and silly and harmless, the kind of thing thousands of kids do every year, the kind of night they were supposed to look back on and laugh about years later. But instead, her story ends in a hospital room, her laughter silenced, her future stolen, and the city of Little Rock, once quiet, now carries an echo, a heavy silence where a young girl's voice used to be, a reminder that in one reckless moment, fear turned into violence. And a child's mistake became a family's lifelong heartbreak. It was supposed to be a moment of unity, an engagement ceremony in the quiet village of Bilge, nestled in Turkey's Mardin province. Two families coming together, music in the air, smiles on faces. Nearly 200 guests gathered under one roof, a crowd of relatives, neighbors, and friends. The room was full, the lights glowing. But by the end of the night, that glow would be replaced with the stench of gunpowder, the sound of gunfire, and the anguished cries of survivors. May 4th, 2009. No one in Bilge would ever forget it. It started without warning. As the guests were being ushered into a large room to begin evening prayers, masked men stormed the gathering. They carried automatic rifles and grenades. In seconds, the celebration turned into a massacre. Grenades exploded, tearing through bodies and ceilings. Then came the gunfire, loud, relentless, merciless. People dropped to the floor. Some tried to flee. Others hid behind overturned tables or clutched their children, hoping the bullets would miss. It didn't matter. The assailants were precise, brutal, and they didn't stop. When the smoke cleared, the horror was almost too much to process. 44 lives had been taken in just 15 minutes. 6 of the dead were children. 16 were women. One entire family, 2 parents and 6 children between the ages of 3 and 12, were all found dead. The faces of many victims had been disfigured beyond recognition. Survivors would later describe the scene as something out of a nightmare. Bodies piled on the floor, blood running across the stone tiles, mothers cradling lifeless children. The bride, Sevgi Aypla Shelebi, was among the dead. So was her husband-to-be, Habib Ari, his sister, her father. Even the local cleric who came to bless the union was killed. 2 little girls only survived by hiding beneath the corpses of their loved ones, pretending to be dead. Outside the village, ambulances raced down the narrow roads as soldiers swarmed the area. The attackers had fled into the darkness, aided by the chaos and a sandstorm that clouded the roads. The military sealed off the village, hoping to trap whoever had turned a moment of love into one of the worst civilian massacres in modern Turkish history. At first, there were fears that a terrorist group like the PKK might be involved. But as investigators dug deeper, another theory emerged, darker and more personal. This was no random act of violence. This was a vendetta. A feud, buried for decades, had erupted over this engagement. The families involved were part of the same clan, members of the heavily armed village guard militia. Old resentments over tribal loyalties, weapons, and pride had bubbled to the surface. Some in the community described it as a twisted combination of honor, hatred, and tradition gone horribly wrong. The killers hadn't come from far away. They knew their victims. They targeted specific people. Some were cousins, some were siblings, and the Knights' Union, meant to heal and unify, had instead reignited a family war that spilled out in blood. The attack stunned the nation. State officials rushed to the village. Blood drives were held across Mardin. Funerals lasted for days. The entire country watched in disbelief as the death toll climbed and the names of the dead were read aloud. For the survivors, there were no answers, only questions. How could something so personal turn so monstrous? How could love spark such hatred? And how does a village recover when nearly every family has lost someone? In Bilge, the music stopped that night and never played again. What was meant to be the beginning of a life together ended with the silencing of 44 lives, stolen not by strangers, but by those they once called family.